Hey guys, what's happening? Niyat here with Film and Comics Explained, and today we'll be exploring Mike Flanagan's Dr. Sleep, the sequel to Stanley Kubrick's adaptation of Stephen King's The Shining. Dr. Sleep came with a fair amount of fanfare when it was released in 2019. Since it was a cinematic sequel to one of the most seminal horror films and books of all time, Dr. Sleep had big shoes to fill. Stephen King had written his sequel to The Shining in 2013, and despite having little in the way of love for the Kubrick-directed original, the story could work as a continuation of both the film and his original novel. Warner Brothers Pictures took up releasing duties and expectations were high after the success of other recent King films like It, both Chapter 1 and 2, and Pet Sematary. Flanagan had also directed an adaptation of King's Gerald's Game for Netflix in 2017, which had also been well received. But due to criticism of its long runtime and slow pacing, along with it bombing at the box office with a worldwide gross of $72 million off a budget of $50 million, Dr. Sleep was considered a commercial failure, and plans for further films in the franchise, including a prequel focusing on the character of Dick Hallorann, were shelved indefinitely. But what caused Dr. Sleep to fail at the box office? What was it that made a film with so much pedigree in terms of writing and acting talent so difficult for audiences to connect with, even during a time when horror was in a mini resurgence? To answer these questions, we need to dig into how Dr. Sleep links with the iconic previous film, and how it compares for both story and scares. For those who've never seen the original film, The Shining essentially charts the slow descent into madness of writer and last-minute hotel caretaker Jack Torrance. Jack becomes increasingly haunted by both the ghosts of the Overlook Hotel and his alcohol addiction, until finally he snaps and attempts to kill his wife Wendy and his son Danny. The film is most noted for its stunning cinematography and stellar direction under the helm of filmmaking pioneer Stanley Kubrick, and it's equally remembered for the impressively maniacal performance from Jack Nicholson. Thanks to King's writing and Kubrick's vision, the film excellently bridges the gap between supernatural and psychological scares to become one of the best horror thrillers of all time.
Here's Johnny!
The story of Dr. Sleep serves as a direct sequel to The Shining, both the novel and the film, and is set several decades later, with Ewan McGregor taking the role of Danny Torrance, the former tricycle-riding child with psychic powers and an unnerving way of pronouncing red rum. Given the traumatic experience with his father and the death of his mother, Torrance becomes a troubled man who spends his years since his father's murderous rampage drinking, womanizing, and taking drugs to forget his past. He's also mastered the art of keeping all those terrible thoughts and entities from the Overlook Hotel locked up in his mind prison. After he steals money from a single mother he encounters, he realizes that his life has hit rock bottom and decides to move to a small town in New Hampshire, where he sobers up and gets a job as a hospice orderly. Elsewhere, a cult of psychic vampires called the True Knot are seen feeding off the essence of people they've tortured and killed. The True Knot are essentially a cult who specifically target those with the Shine, aka the psychic power that Dan Torrance has, and are led by the enigmatic Rose the Hat, played with gusto by the ever-dependable Rebecca Ferguson. The vamps extract the Shine, known as steam, from their victims and absorb it into their life forces. With each person they consume, more time is added to their life, allowing some of its members to live for centuries. Certain members also have other special abilities, like Silent Saray's invisibility, or Snakebite Handy's ability to make her victims fall asleep. As if that wasn't creepy and evil enough, they generally target children or teens who exhibit signs of having the Shine, as they're easier to overpower than adults with more control of their abilities. Finding food scarce, the group stoop to more desperate measures to keep themselves from starving to death, but their actions haven't gone unnoticed, and a teenager named Abra, who is strong with the Shining, begins to have psychic visions about what they're doing and telepathically communicates this to Dan. Dr. Sleep expands on the nature of the Shining power quite a bit here. Since Abra is a bit stronger than Dan, we get to see more of its astral powers come into play. For example, there's this great scene where Abra is levitating spoons in the kitchen while imitating a magician's act she saw on TV. And by the end of the film, we even get to see how Abra's mother comes to terms with her daughter's strange powers, a dynamic we didn't really get to witness between Danny and Wendy in The Shining. After getting the alert from Abra and convincing Billy, his boss and best friend, that he wasn't crazy, Danny and Billy attempt to stop the cult from killing more innocent people and stage a trap which effectively wipes out most of the group but kills Billy in the process. Abra's father is also killed and the girl is abducted by Rose's lover and number 2, Crow Daddy, but she manages to tune into her shining powers with the help of Dan, allowing him to shine into Abra and cause Crow Daddy to get into a car accident. And again, this shows an interesting new aspect of the psychic powers that we hadn't seen before. With nobody left to turn to, Dan and Abra join forces and head back to the place where everything began, the Overlook Hotel, where a final confrontation with Rose is inevitable. Flanagan's film changes some of the elements in King's Dr. Sleep to marry it with Kubrick's The Shining universe. The biggest plot change from the novel is the fact that the Overlook Hotel is still standing in the movie, whereas in the book series, the hotel is burnt down after a boiler explosion at the end of the Shining novel. One might even say that without a trip to the Overlook Hotel, the film would have felt too disparate to The Shining, and by bringing the characters back to the exquisitely designed hotel, you begin to feel the resonating presence of Nicholson's Jack, and can almost hear his chilling voice. How we end up there is honestly irrelevant. Dan flees with Abra to the hotel after successfully killing most of the True Knot, and while the Overlook Hotel's inclusion isn't really necessary in terms of plot, it is essential in terms of the narrative structure of the series. When Rose follows the two to the hotel as Dan predicted, the final confrontation is both surprising and complex, as the ghosts that had tormented his father are used to destroy her. But with Danny mortally wounded, Abra is left to fight off the full force of the hotel, which uses the last vestiges of Torrance's life to hunt her down. Yes, in these final moments, Dan becomes just as mad as his father was, but unlike the maniacal Jack, he fights back and uses the last moments of his own life to bring the hotel down and allow Abra to escape. And just like how Dick Halloran had mentored him from beyond the grave in the beginning of the film, we see in the film's closing moments that the story has come full circle, and Dan is now fulfilling a similar mentor role for Abra. The ending of Dr. Sleep highlights and reinforces the overarching metaphor built into both films. While The Shining is at its heart a film about alcoholism and how this can bring you to madness, Dr. Sleep is about recovery and the need to confront the ghosts of your past to successfully move on.
It seems to me you grew up fine, son, but you still owe a debt. Pay it.
The Overlook Hotel is a metaphor for substance abuse and addiction. When Danny returns to the hotel, he's not only returning to the root of his own descent into substance abuse, but also to the very spot where his father succumbed to the same disease. Unlike his father though, Dan was strong and had already begun the long road to recovery. We know from the beginning of the first film that Jack once stopped drinking because he broke a young Danny's arm, but by the end of The Shining, the fight has been lost and he fully embraces the vice that haunts him, to the detriment of himself and everyone around him. One of the key catalysts to Jack's downfall is the moment when Lloyd, the bartender in the Overlook's immense ballroom, pours him a drink that he accepts.
Anything you say, Lloyd. Anything you say.
Lloyd is, in essence, the whispering voice of alcoholism, and when Jack succumbs, he's giving up everything and letting addiction win. Dan, on the other hand, succeeds in fighting these urges, showing that he has learned from the errors of his father and is more prepared than he was.
Are you gonna take your medicine? I'm not.
This strength allows him to defeat his demons and burn the Overlook to the ground, something that his father could never do. But unfortunately, the destruction of the Overlook couldn't defeat the ghosts of his past. Even in death, Danny is needed to keep the demons of the old hotel at bay, as seen when the film draws to a close and he and Abra confront the lady in the bathtub together. It's easy to look at Dr. Sleep's lack of financial success and lay the blame on its convoluted plot and slow pacing, but while the film definitely has a more involved and complex narrative, the pacing is actually similar to the original film. Both movies are a slow burn that rely on the build-up of atmosphere and the development of characters to worm its way into our brains, and both are unsettling experiences absent of jump scares or cheap horror movie tropes that drag you into their narrative. Comparatively, the Dr. Sleep movie is a more faithful adaptation of its source material than Kubrick's The Shining. This admittedly puts the film in a tricky spot. While it can operate as a sequel to the 1980 film, Flanagan and Kubrick have entirely different creative visions, and that likely turned off audiences who were looking for a continuation of the claustrophobic psychological horror. If Dr. Sleep had operated as completely standalone from Kubrick's film, it may have actually gelled a little better with audiences, as though it marries the stories together well, it's hard for the film to escape the shadow of Kubrick's classic. For me, Dr. Sleep was an interesting movie that I thoroughly enjoyed, and while it doesn't have the same psychological horror of its big brother, The Shining, it feels as though it genuinely belongs in the same universe as its predecessor. I obviously couldn't help but compare the two films throughout its runtime, and I have to admit that Dr. Sleep came up second best. For one, it doesn't have the inimitable Jack Nicholson, though the stand-in Jack does an okay job. It also doesn't have the disorientating spatial framing that Kubrick pioneered, and most importantly, Johnny wasn't there. Despite this, I love the story, the creepy atmosphere the film sustains, and the way it neatly ties up Danny's character arc, while paving the way for Abra to shine in potential sequels, pun intended. The acting is also terrific. Ferguson, McGregor, and the ever-dependable Cliff Curtis in particular are solid, as is Kylie Curran, who plays the young Abra.
I hope that hurts. A lot.
While I do hold The Shining up in high regard, we must not forget that it too was a box office and critical flop on release. Only after years of reappraisal did it gain its rightful place at the top of the horror movie tree. With both films enduring the same fate upon release, it'll be interesting to see how Dr. Sleep fares over the years. But I'd of course love to hear what you guys thought about the movie. Did you like it? Hate it? Did you think it works well as a sequel? And if not, why? So please share all of these in the comments below. With that having been said, that's all for today, folks. Don't forget to hit subscribe and click the notification icon to stay up to date on all my content. And if there's anything else you'd like to request, please don't hesitate to ask. As always, it's been a pleasure. Niyat here with Film Comics Explained. Thanks for stopping by.